There's a background painting in the Krusty Krab that most people have never noticed. It's this tiny, slightly crooked frame on the wall behind the cash register. And if you freeze the frame on certain episodes from the first 3 seasons, you can just barely make out what it is. It's a painting of the ocean, an underwater restaurant, with a painting of the ocean hanging on the wall. And the thing is, nobody in Bikini Bottom ever acknowledges it. Not SpongeBob, not Squidward, not Mr. Krabs. It's just there. A picture of the thing they're already inside of, hanging in a restaurant where a sponge fries burgers for a crab. And I think that one tiny detail tells you everything you need to know about what kind of show SpongeBob SquarePants actually is. Because on the surface, yeah, it's a cartoon about a sea sponge who lives in a pineapple and works at a fast food restaurant. That's the pitch. That's what you tell someone who's never seen it. But underneath that, and I mean way underneath, there's something else going on. Something stranger, something darker. Something that a marine biologist named Stephen Hillenberg buried into every frame of this show from the very beginning. And tonight, we're going to find all of it. So if you're settling in late, get comfortable. Maybe turn the lights down, because we're going through the SpongeBob Iceberg, all of it. From the stuff everyone knows at the surface, all the way down to the things that'll genuinely make you look at this show differently. And we're going to be here for a while. If you haven't subscribed yet, this is a good time. It really does help us keep making these for you. But honestly, I don't want to waste time on that when there's this much to talk about. So let's just get into it. I want to start where most people start, at the top, with the stuff that's right there on the surface. Because I think even the most obvious things about SpongeBob are weirder than people give them credit for. Take the premise. A sea sponge who lives in a pineapple under the sea. His best friend is a starfish who lives under a rock. His neighbor is a squid who plays clarinet badly and hates his life. His boss is a crab who's obsessed with money. And his other friend is a squirrel from Texas who lives in an air dome at the bottom of the ocean. That's the setup. And somehow, starting from that, Stephen Hillenberg created what might be the most culturally significant animated show of the last 30 years. The pilot episode, Help Wanted, aired on May 1st, 1999, right after the Nickelodeon Kids' Choice Awards, Season 1, Episode 1. And here's something most people don't realize. The recording script for that pilot was completed on May 12th, 1997. The final storyboard was done by June 3rd, 1997. That means Hillenberg and his team had been working on this thing for years before anyone outside of Nickelodeon ever saw it. The final master for the pilot was delivered to Nickelodeon on September 18th, 1997, and the revised, edited master didn't arrive until April 27th, 1999, just days before it aired. 2 years of revision. 2 years of making sure this thing was exactly right. And when you watch Help Wanted now, knowing all of that, you can feel it. Every joke lands. Every visual gag is perfectly timed. SpongeBob walks up to the Krusty Krab for the first time, and there's this energy coming off the screen. This pure, uncut optimism that feels completely genuine. He wants to be a fry cook. That's it. That's his dream. And the show never treats that as a joke. I mean, they get comedy out of it, obviously. But SpongeBob's love for his job is always sincere. And I think that's the thing that hooked people from the very first episode. Here's the thing about the first 3 seasons that I keep coming back to. The show was created by a guy who genuinely understood the ocean. Stephen Hillenberg wasn't just some animator who thought sea creatures were funny. He graduated from Humboldt State University in 1984 with a degree in natural resource planning and interpretation, with an emphasis on marine resources. He worked as an instructor at the Orange County Marine Institute, teaching kids about tide pools and marine biology. And while he was there, he wrote and illustrated this educational comic called The Intertidal Zone, which featured anthropomorphic sea creatures teaching kids about ocean life. One of the characters in that comic was a little guy called Bob the Sponge. And look, Bob the Sponge in The Intertidal Zone looked nothing like the SpongeBob we know. He was drawn to look like an actual sea sponge, lumpy and organic, not the rectangular kitchen sponge shape that became iconic. But the DNA was there. The idea of using sea creatures as characters, giving them human problems and personalities while keeping them rooted in actual marine biology, that was always the vision. And this is where it gets interesting to me. After working at the Marine Institute, Hillenberg enrolled at the California Institute of the Arts, CalArts, in 1989. He studied experimental animation under Jules Engel, who was the founding director of the program. Engel actually saw the intertidal zone and was impressed enough to accept Hillenberg into the program. Hillenberg graduated in 1992 with a Master of Fine Arts in Experimental Animation. Think about that. The guy who created SpongeBob SquarePants has a Master's in Experimental Animation, and a background in marine science. That combination is wild. And it explains so much about why the show looks the way it does, why the visual humor is so precise, why the background art is so detailed, and why the underwater world of Bikini Bottom feels so weirdly real, despite being completely absurd. After CalArts, Hillenberg worked on Rocko's modern life at Nickelodeon, and that's where he met Tom Kenny, who would eventually become the voice of SpongeBob. And the story of how Kenny got the role is one of my favorite pieces of SpongeBob production history. Kenny had done this voice for a minor female alligator character on Rocko's modern life, a character named Al, who appeared in the episode Dear John. It was this high-pitched, nasally, cheerful voice, and Hillenberg heard it and something clicked. When he started developing SpongeBob, he told Nickelodeon executives, "That's it. I don't want to hear anybody else do the voice. We've got SpongeBob." But the network insisted on auditioning more actors, and Hillenberg pushed back hard. Here's the funny part. Kenny had actually forgotten the voice. He'd created it for a one-off character and moved on. But Hillenberg remembered. He used a clip from that Rocko's episode to remind Kenny of the voice. And the rest, well, you know. That voice became one of the most recognizable sounds in television history. Okay, so let's talk about what everyone talks about when they talk about SpongeBob. The Golden Age, seasons 1 through 3. And I know, people have been going on about this forever, but I think most discussions of the Golden Age focus on the wrong things. People talk about which episodes are the best, which ones are the funniest, and yeah, that matters. But what I find more interesting is what those first 3 seasons were actually doing underneath the comedy. Because if you go back and watch them now, as an adult, there's this whole other layer that you completely missed as a kid. Take Pizza Delivery, Season 1, Episode 5. First segment, aired August 14th, 1999. On the surface, it's a simple premise. Mr. Krabs sends SpongeBob and Squidward to deliver a pizza. They get lost. Chaos ensues. But here's what's really happening in that episode. SpongeBob and Squidward are stranded together in what's essentially a desert. And the entire time, SpongeBob is relentlessly positive while Squidward is slowly losing his mind. And the emotional core of the episode, the part that actually hits, is the ending. They finally make it to the customer's house, and the guy refuses the pizza because they didn't bring him a drink. He just lays into SpongeBob. And SpongeBob, this character who has been nothing but cheerful for the entire episode, just stands there with tears welling up in his eyes. And then Squidward, the guy who's been complaining the entire time, who has made it abundantly clear that he doesn't care about SpongeBob or the pizza or any of it, takes the pizza box and slams it in the customer's face. That moment, that right there, that's the show. Because it tells you that underneath Squidward's constant irritation, there's genuine care. And it tells you that SpongeBob's optimism isn't invincible, that he can be hurt, and that the show is willing to let you see that. Rolling Stone ranked Pizza Delivery number 89 on their list of the 100 best TV episodes of all time. A SpongeBob episode, an 11-minute cartoon about delivering pizza. And honestly, it earned that spot. And speaking of Squidward, I need to sit with him for a minute, because I think Squidward Tentacles might be one of the best written characters in animation history. And I don't say that lightly. Here's why. When you're a kid watching SpongeBob, Squidward is the grumpy neighbor. He's the obstacle. He's the guy who doesn't want to have fun. And the comedy comes from SpongeBob and Patrick annoying him. Simple. But when you rewatch the show as an adult, something happens. You start to see yourself in Squidward. You start to understand him. He works a dead-end job at a fast food restaurant. He has artistic ambitions, the clarinet, the painting, the sculpture, that nobody takes seriously. He's surrounded by people who are either too naive to understand his frustration or too self-absorbed to care. He lives between his 2 loudest, most chaotic neighbors. And every single day, he wakes up and does it all again. That's not just a cartoon character. That's a portrait of adult disillusionment that hit me way harder on my 3rd rewatch than anything had a right to. There's this moment, and I think about it a lot, where Squidward is standing in front of a gravestone, and it reads, "Here lies Squidward's hopes and dreams." And it's played for a laugh. Of course it is. But the reason that joke works is because there's real weight behind it. The show is acknowledging that Squidward's frustration isn't just comedic, it's existential. He's trapped. And the show knows he's trapped. And instead of letting him out, it keeps putting him through the same cycle, day after day. Because that's what life does to people sometimes. I've seen academic papers comparing Squidward to Jean-Paul Sartre's concept of existential nihilism. And honestly, they're not wrong. Squidward's whole deal is that he's searching for meaning, for purpose, for validation, and the world keeps telling him no. And the darkest part is that SpongeBob, who has none of Squidward's talent or sophistication, is genuinely happy. SpongeBob found meaning in flipping burgers, and Squidward can't understand that, and it drives him crazy. That tension, that contrast between SpongeBob's simple joy and Squidward's complex misery is the engine that powers the entire show. And it's one of the most sophisticated pieces of character writing I've ever seen in any medium, let alone a Nickelodeon cartoon. And you know what? While we're talking about the Golden Age, let me bring up a few more episodes that I think don't get their due in these conversations. Shanghaied, Season 2, Episode 13, first segment. This one originally aired as a television special called You Wish on March 9th, 2001. And the production story behind this episode is one of the most innovative things Nickelodeon ever did. During the original airing, Patchy the Pirate, the live-action host played by Tom Kenny, came on screen and told viewers they could vote for the ending. By phone, 1-800-62-44-094, or online at Nickelodeon's website. You could choose whether SpongeBob, Patrick, or Squidward got the final wish from the Flying Dutchman. And depending on who won, the ending changed. SpongeBob won the vote, and his wish was that the Flying Dutchman would become a vegetarian, which resulted in him, Patrick, and Squidward being turned into fruit. The other two endings, the ones where Squidward or Patrick get the wish, both end with the Flying Dutchman eating all three of them. So the only ending where they survive is the one the audience chose. Think about that. In 2001, before interactive Netflix specials, before Choose Your Own Adventure became a streaming gimmick, SpongeBob let its audience determine the fate of its characters in real time. And the fact that the audience chose the optimistic ending, the SpongeBob ending, tells you something about who was watching the show and what they wanted from it. Then there's Idiot Box, Season 3, Episode 4, second segment. Aired March 1st, 2002, paired with Nasty Patty. SpongeBob and Patrick order a big screen television just to play inside the box it came in. They throw the TV away, and the entire episode is Squidward trying to figure out how they're creating realistic sound effects from inside an empty cardboard box. Avalanches, mountain climbing, car chases, all coming from this box, and the show never explains it. Squidward climbs inside the box at the end, tries to use his imagination, and gets picked up by a garbage truck. The episode title is a slang term for television, and the irony is that SpongeBob and Patrick have rejected television in favor of something that television can never be: pure imagination. It's a show on TV mocking the idea that TV is the best entertainment available, and the episode won a Golden Reel Award in 2002 for Best Sound Editing in Television Animation, which is perfect, because the sound design is what makes the whole joke work. You hear the sounds coming from the box, you know it's impossible, and the show refuses to give you a rational explanation. It just says, imagination. That's it, deal with it. And Club SpongeBob, Season 3, Episode 2, first segment, aired July 12th, 2002. This is the Magic Conch Shell episode. SpongeBob and Patrick build a clubhouse in a tree, and they have this magic conch shell toy, a parody of the Magic 8-Ball, that they consult before making any decisions. Squidward forces his way into the club. They all get catapulted into the kelp forest. And for the rest of the episode, SpongeBob and Patrick blindly follow the conch's advice, while Squidward tries to use logic and reason. The conch keeps telling them to do nothing, and everything works out for them. Food falls from the sky. A park ranger shows up, and the ranger also has a magic conch shell. And the episode ends with everyone, including Squidward, chanting, "All hail the magic conch," while doing absolutely nothing. And there's this one line in the episode where Squidward screams, "Why must every 11 minutes of my life be filled with misery?" The average runtime of a SpongeBob episode is 11 minutes. He's not just talking about his life, he's talking about the structure of the show itself. He knows he's trapped in 11-minute cycles of suffering, and the show lets him say it out loud, and nobody acknowledges what he just revealed. That's the kind of meta-humor that operates on a level most shows can't even reach. Alright, let me take a breath here because we're about to go deeper. We're past the surface now, past the stuff that most fans know, and we're getting into the territory where things start to get genuinely interesting. The production history, the hidden details, the stuff that even dedicated fans might have missed. Let's talk about Reef Blower, Season 1, Episode 1, second segment. This aired alongside Help Wanted on May 1st, 1999. And here's the thing about Reef Blower that blew my mind when I first learned it. It's completely silent, no dialogue. The only sound is Squidward's growling and gasping, performed by Roger Bumpass, and the reason it has no dialogue isn't some bold artistic choice. It's because it would have cost about $2,500 extra to add dialogue to what was essentially 3 minutes of filler. Help Wanted ran about 8 minutes. Tea at the Tree Dome, the other segment in that episode, was a standard 11 minutes. They needed something to fill the gap, and they didn't have the budget for voice recording. So Hillenberg and his team made a silent cartoon, and it works beautifully. It's pure visual comedy. SpongeBob trying to blow a shell off his lawn and accidentally sucking up the entire ocean. 2 minutes and 50 seconds of slapstick that established the show's visual language before a single word of dialogue was spoken. That's the kind of creative problem solving that defined the early seasons. Now let me talk about an episode that I think deserves way more attention than it gets. SB129, Season 1, Episode 14, First Segment. Aired December 31st, 1999. New Year's Eve, right at the turn of the millennium. And the reason they aired it that night is obvious when you know the plot. Squidward accidentally locks himself in the Krusty Krab freezer and stays frozen for 2,000 years. He wakes up in the future, in the year 4017, and he meets Spongetron, a chrome descendant of SpongeBob, and Patron, a descendant of Patrick. Then he time travels to the prehistoric past, meets primitive versions of SpongeBob and Patrick, and eventually ends up in this white void, this empty space where there's nothing. No past, no future, no SpongeBob, no Krusty Krab. Just Squidward, alone, in pure emptiness. And here's what gets me about that sequence. Squidward has been wishing for peace and quiet the entire episode. He's been running from SpongeBob across time itself. And when he finally gets what he wants, when he's truly alone with nothing around him, he panics. He screams. He can't handle it. He doesn't want silence. He doesn't want emptiness. He wants to go home. He wants the Krusty Krab. He wants, and this is the part that hits the hardest, he wants SpongeBob. The character he spends every episode trying to escape from is the one thing he can't live without. And the show does all of this in 11 minutes, in a cartoon about time travel, on a kids' network, on New Year's Eve, 1999. I have genuinely never heard anyone talk about SB129 in the way it deserves. That void sequence is one of the most philosophically loaded moments in the entire series, and it happens in the first season. Hillenberg was doing this from the start. Let me keep going because there's so much here. Graveyard Shift, Season 2, Episode 16, First Segment. Aired September 6th, 2002. This is the hash-slinging slasher episode, and if you grew up watching SpongeBob, this one probably terrified you at some point. Mr. Krabs decides to keep the Krusty Krab open 24 hours, and Squidward, annoyed at having to work the night shift, tells SpongeBob a ghost story about a former fry cook who comes back to haunt the restaurant, the hash-slinging slasher. And the story is absurd. Squidward is clearly making it up as he goes, but the atmosphere of that episode is genuinely unsettling for a kids' show. The lighting changes, the sound design gets darker, and when the supposed signs of the hash-slinging slasher start happening for real, there's this moment where even Squidward is scared, and you realize the show has been building actual tension this entire time. But here's the part that nobody talks about, the ending. Everything gets explained away. The lights flickering were just a faulty light. The phone call was from the phone company. But then who was flickering the lights? And that final reveal, a vampire who works at the Krusty Krab, flicking the lights on and off, it's played as a throwaway gag. Squidward says, Nosferatu, and the episode ends. But think about what the show just did. It set up a horror parody, deconstructed it, resolved it rationally, and then in the last 5 seconds reintroduced the supernatural as a completely casual, unexplained thing. The rules of Bikini Bottom allow for vampires, apparently, and nobody questions it. That kind of storytelling, where the punchline undermines the entire logical framework of the episode, is peak SpongeBob. It's comedy operating on multiple levels simultaneously. Kids laugh because Squidward made a funny face. Adults laugh because the show just broke its own narrative in the most elegant way possible. And speaking of dark, let's go there, because the deeper you go into the SpongeBob Iceberg, the darker it gets, and I think that's by design. Hillenberg understood something that a lot of creators don't. You can hide genuinely complex, sometimes disturbing ideas inside bright colors and silly voices, and the audience will absorb them without even realizing it. Nasty Patty, Season 3, Episode 4, First Segment. March 1st, 2002. and I need you to think about the plot of this episode for a second. A health inspector comes to the Krusty Krab. SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs hear a news report about a fake inspector scamming restaurants for free food, so they assume their inspector is the fraud. They make him a disgusting Krabby Patty, the Nasty Patty, loaded with volcano sauce, seahorse radish, toenail clippings, and they drop it in the toilet before drying it with filthy gym socks. The inspector chokes on a fly before eating it and appears to pass out. SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs believe they've just committed a serious crime, and what follows is essentially a noir thriller parody where they try to hide the body. They're stuffing what they think is a corpse into the trunk of a car. They're dragging it through mud. They're hiding it from the police. In a children's cartoon on Nickelodeon in 2002, the inspector turns out to be alive. Of course, he'd just choked on a fly. But the fact that the show committed so fully to the premise that it played two characters trying to hide a body, completely straight for most of the runtime, tells you something about the creative freedom Hillenberg and his team had during those first 3 seasons. They weren't afraid of dark comedy. They embraced it. Okay, I want to talk about Sailor Mouth now, because it connects to something bigger. Season 2, Episode 18, first segment. Aired September 21st, 2001. This is the one where SpongeBob and Patrick learn a bad word. And the thing that makes the episode so perfect, and I don't use that word lightly, is how it handles profanity. SpongeBob reads a word on the dumpster behind the Krusty Krab and starts using it without understanding what it means. But we never hear the actual word. Every time someone says it, the show replaces it with a dolphin chirp. And here's the production detail that makes this even better. Steven Hillenberg couldn't use a standard bleep sound. He said he couldn't even use a bleep, so he used a dolphin sound instead. And Tom Kenny has confirmed that during the recording sessions, the actors were actually improvising fake profanities that would later be covered by the sound effects. So what you're hearing when a dolphin chirps on screen is Tom Kenny and the cast actually saying something, and the show is covering it up in the most on-brand way possible. The episode is about the power of language, about how words only have the power we give them, and it does all of this while also being one of the funniest 11 minutes of television ever produced. And then Mama Krabs shows up at the end and says every word under the sea, and the entire bottom of the ocean erupts in various animal sounds covering the profanity. And it's the perfect ending because it tells you that everyone in Bikini Bottom, even the sweet old mother figures, all know these words. They all use them. And SpongeBob just happened to be the naive one who said them out loud. I keep going back and forth about whether I should talk about the adult humor in SpongeBob, because it's been discussed to the point of exhaustion online. But I think it matters for the iceberg because it speaks to something deeper about how the show was designed. Hillenberg built SpongeBob to work on 2 levels. For kids, it's colorful slapstick with funny voices. For adults, it's a show filled with references and innuendos that sail completely over children's heads. And some of these are genuinely surprising when you spot them. There's the scene where SpongeBob is in the bath and tells Gary not to drop the soap while winking. There's Patrick covering a certain area when SpongeBob tells him his genius is showing. There's Squidward's quip about it being that time of the month while pointing at a giant red blimp. None of these are accidental. They're precision-engineered jokes designed to give adult viewers something to chew on while their kids laugh at the surface-level gag. And the fact that Nickelodeon let most of these through tells you that the show had an unusual amount of creative freedom in those early years. That freedom is a huge part of why seasons 1 through 3 feel so distinct from everything that came after. And while we're here, I want to briefly mention something that lives in the shallow water of the iceberg, but that I think is worth flagging: the show's approach to gender and identity. SpongeBob, as a sea sponge, doesn't really have a fixed gender in the biological sense. Sea sponges are capable of both sexual and asexual reproduction. The show has never made a big deal about this, but it's come up in interesting ways over the years. Hillenberg was once asked about SpongeBob's orientation and simply said the character was asexual, not in the identity sense, but in the biological sense. He's a sponge. He doesn't reproduce the way mammals do. And the show has always been remarkably chill about SpongeBob performing actions that don't fit neatly into traditional gender expectations. He cries openly. He loves his friends without restraint. He has zero interest in appearing tough or masculine. And Patrick is the same way. The two of them exist in a space that's completely free from the anxieties about masculinity that define so many other male cartoon characters. And I think that's one of the reasons the show resonates so broadly. It doesn't impose a framework on its characters. It just lets them be. SpongeBob is SpongeBob. That's enough. And I think this is a good moment to talk about the thing that changed everything. The first SpongeBob movie. The SpongeBob SquarePants movie, released on November 19th, 2004. And here's what most casual fans don't know. Hillenberg intended this to be the end. Not just the end of the movies. The end of SpongeBob SquarePants. Period. He halted production on the show in 2002 to work on the film. He wanted it to be the series finale. He'd said publicly that he felt 3 seasons were enough, that he didn't want the show to, in his words, jump the shark. The movie was his grand goodbye. SpongeBob becomes the manager of the Krusty Krab 2. He and Patrick save Bikini Bottom. It's triumphant. It's emotional. It's everything a series finale should be. But here's where the story takes a turn, and honestly, it still frustrates me to think about. Nickelodeon couldn't afford to let SpongeBob end. The show was too valuable. It was pulling in 15 million weekly viewers by the end of 2001, at least 5 million of whom were adults. It was Nickelodeon's cash cow, and they weren't about to let it go. So they pushed for more seasons. And Hillenberg, who had made his feelings clear, stepped back. He didn't leave entirely. He stayed on as an executive producer with an advisory role, reviewing each episode and offering suggestions. But he wasn't running the show day to day anymore. He appointed Paul Tibbitt, who had been a writer, director, and storyboard artist on the series, as the new showrunner. And with that handoff, something changed. I want to be fair here, because I think the conversation about post-movie SpongeBob is way too simplistic. Most people just say seasons 4 and 5 are bad, and leave it at that. And I mean, that's not entirely wrong. Most of the original production crew left when Hillenberg stepped back, and new people came in, and the style of the work shifted. The humor got broader. The characters started getting flanderized, a term for when a single trait gets exaggerated to the point of parody. SpongeBob got more childish. Patrick got dumber. Squidward got more punished. Mr. Krabs got greedier to the point of being genuinely unpleasant. And the visual storytelling that had been so precise in the first 3 seasons started to feel more generic. And I think this connects to something that fans argue about constantly, but never quite pin down. The question of authorship. What makes a SpongeBob episode feel like a SpongeBob episode? Is it the characters? The jokes? The animation style? Because all of those things technically continued after Hillenberg left. The same character names, the same voice actors, the same general premise. But something was off. And I've spent way too long thinking about what that something is. And I think it comes down to restraint. The Golden Age episodes knew when to stop. They knew when a joke had been pushed far enough. They knew when a character moment needed breathing room. They knew that not every scene needed to be loud. The post-movie episodes, especially in the mid-seasons, lost that sense of restraint. Everything became bigger, louder, more extreme. Patrick didn't just do dumb things. He did grotesque things. Squidward didn't just get annoyed. He got brutalized. The show stopped trusting its audience to find the comedy and subtlety and started shoving the comedy directly into their faces. And look, I'm not saying there aren't funny moments in the post-movie era. There are. But the texture changed. The feel changed. And for fans who grew up on the early seasons, that difference was impossible to ignore. But here's the thing. Season 4, when you actually go back and watch it, still has some good episodes. It's not a total cliff. It's more of a gradual slope. The real decline, the part that fans point to when they say the show lost its soul, happened in seasons 6 through 8. That's where you start getting episodes that feel like they were made by committee, where the jokes don't land the way they used to, where characters do things that feel wrong for who they are. And there's a specific example that I think crystallizes this difference. Take an episode like SpongeBob You're Fired from 2013. The premise is that Mr. Krabs fires SpongeBob to save a nickel. That's a premise that could work in the Golden Age. Mr. Krabs being ridiculously cheap is a core character trait, but the execution tells you everything about how the show changed. In the Golden Age, the comedy would come from the absurdity of the situation and the emotional dynamics between characters. In this later episode, SpongeBob goes to work at various other restaurants and gets fired from all of them, and the comedy is broader, louder, more slapstick. There's less emotional texture. SpongeBob's devastation at losing his job, which should be the emotional anchor of the whole thing, gets lost in the noise of gag after gag. The episode was also controversial because some critics felt it was mocking unemployed people, which is the kind of reading that would never have attached to a Golden Age episode because the Golden Age was so careful about where the joke landed. The joke was always on the system, on the absurdity of Bikini Bottom, not on the vulnerable characters within it. When the show lost that distinction, it lost something essential. And look, I know I'm being hard on the later seasons, and I want to balance that with genuine appreciation for the people who worked on them. Paul Tibbitt inherited an impossible job. He was asked to continue a show that its creator had tried to end, with a smaller, less experienced team, under pressure from a network that wanted quantity over quality, and he did his best. Seasons 4 and 5 have episodes that I genuinely enjoy. Krusty Towers is funny. Skill Crane is funny. They're not Golden Age episodes, but they're solid. And the fact that even the weaker seasons maintained enough quality to keep the show on the air and keep audiences watching is its own achievement. Running any show for over 2 decades is extraordinary. Running one that started this good is nearly impossible. So, while I mourn what the show lost after Hillenberg stepped back, I also respect the people who kept it alive. And I think the reason this matters for the iceberg is that it reveals something about what made SpongeBob special in the first place. It wasn't just the characters, or the jokes, or the animation. It was the singular creative vision behind all of it. Hillenberg understood these characters in a way that couldn't be replicated just by following a style guide. When he was in the room, everything clicked. When he wasn't, it was still SpongeBob. But it was SpongeBob with something missing, like a cover band playing the right notes but not feeling the music. All right, we're going deeper now. If you're still with me, and if it's late, I appreciate you sticking around, because this is where the iceberg starts getting into territory that most people never explore. Hidden continuity, production secrets, the things that only come to light when you start pulling at threads and refuse to stop. Let's talk about Bikini Bottom and where it actually is. This is one of the most well-known fan theories, but there's more to it than most people realize. Bikini Bottom is named after Bikini Atoll, a real coral reef in the Marshall Islands that was used by the United States for nuclear weapons testing between 1946 and 1958. 23 nuclear tests were conducted there. The United States relocated 167 Bikinians from their homes before the testing began, and many of them experienced starvation on the islands they were moved to. On March 1st, 1954, the Bravo test created an explosion equivalent to 1,000 Hiroshima-sized bombs. It was the largest nuclear detonation the United States ever conducted. Now, the theory goes like this. The talking sea creatures in Bikini Bottom are mutations, the result of nuclear radiation from the testing. And here's what makes this theory different from most fan theories. It has actual support from people involved with the show. Mr. Lawrence, the writer and voice actor who plays Plankton, confirmed in a 2024 interview that Bikini Bottom being connected to the nuclear testing site was part of the show's underlying mythology. However, Tom Kenny, SpongeBob's voice actor, pushed back on this in a 2015 interview, saying he didn't think SpongeBob and his friends were mutations. So even within the creative team, there's disagreement. But the visual evidence is hard to ignore. One of the bombs at Bikini Atoll was detonated underwater, and the explosion created this massive mushroom cloud of water. The show replicates that specific shape in almost every explosion that happens in Bikini Bottom. That's not a coincidence. Hillenberg, with his marine science background, absolutely knew what Bikini Atoll was. Whether the nuclear connection was intentional or just a dark layer he let exist, it changes the texture of the entire show once you know about it. Every time you see a mushroom cloud in SpongeBob, that shape has history. Real, devastating human history. And while we're in the deep water, let me talk about something that I've been going back and forth about, including the 7 deadly sins theory. This one has been around forever, and it's been discussed to the point where it almost feels played out. But I'm including it because the response from the show's actual writers is more interesting than the theory itself. The theory maps each main character to one of the 7 deadly sins. SpongeBob is lust, not in a physical sense, but in the sense of excessive love and enthusiasm for everything. Patrick is sloth. He literally lives under a rock, and once won an award for doing nothing the longest. Squidward is wrath, the perpetually angry neighbor. Mr. Krabs is greed, obviously. Plankton is envy, spending his entire existence trying to steal what Mr. Krabs has. Sandy is pride, taking enormous pride in being from Texas and in her scientific abilities. And Gary is gluttony, always meowing for food, and there's a running gag where SpongeBob forgets to feed him. Gary even ran away in the episode Have You Seen This Snail? Because SpongeBob neglected his feeding. Now, I've seen people push back on this theory by pointing out that SpongeBob as lust doesn't make intuitive sense. But the mapping isn't about physical desire, it's about excessive devotion. SpongeBob's love for everyone and everything is so extreme, so all-consuming, that it becomes its own kind of obsession. He loves jellyfishing with a fervor that borders on mania. He loves his job with an intensity that his coworkers find disturbing. He loves Squidward, who explicitly does not want to be loved by him, and that love is relentless and inescapable. SpongeBob's lust is the lust for connection, for experience, for joy, and it overwhelms everything in its path. When you frame it that way, the mapping actually makes perfect sense. SpongeBob doesn't just enjoy life, he devours it. He consumes experience the way Mr. Krabs consumes money. His appetite for existence is insatiable. Now, Mr. Lawrence, when asked about this, said something that I find really revealing. He acknowledged that the characters likely have individual traits that could be mapped to the sins, but that it probably wasn't as deliberate or concrete as fans have made it out to be. And I think that response is more interesting than a simple yes or no, because what it suggests is that Hillenberg and his writers created characters who were archetypal enough to map onto ancient moral frameworks, but specific enough to feel like real personalities. That's incredibly difficult to do. You don't get characters that resonate across frameworks like the 7 deadly sins by accident. You get them by understanding human nature at a fundamental level, and then filtering it through the lens of sea creatures in a kid's cartoon. And honestly, I find that more impressive than if the sins mapping had been intentional. I want to go back to specific episodes now, because there are some deep cuts that I think people sleep on, and they connect to the larger themes we've been talking about. Squid's Day Off, Season 2, Episode 1, Second Segment. This aired in 2000, and it's an episode about Squidward losing his mind. Literally, Mr. Krabs gets injured, arms detached, slammed against a wall, knocked unconscious by a falling shelf, and leaves Squidward in charge of the Krusty Krab. Squidward tries to leave SpongeBob alone at the restaurant and go enjoy his day off, but he can't stop worrying about what SpongeBob might be doing. He keeps running back to check, finding SpongeBob perfectly fine every time, and the paranoia spirals until Squidward is hallucinating. His nose falls off in the mirror. He's talking to himself. The animation gets more distorted as his mental state deteriorates. And the show plays all of this for laughs, which somehow makes it funnier and more disturbing at the same time. Because what you're watching is a character have a genuine psychological breakdown in real time, and the show is saying, "Isn't this hilarious?" And the answer, uncomfortably, is yes. Or procrastination. Season 2, Episode 17. First segment. SpongeBob has to write an essay for Mrs. Puff's boating school. The topic is what not to do at a stoplight. And the entire episode is just SpongeBob not writing. He sharpens his pencil. He goes to the kitchen. He stares at the blank paper. He falls asleep and has a nightmare. If you've ever sat down to do something important and spent 3 hours doing everything except the thing, this episode is a personal attack. It captures the experience of procrastination so perfectly, so viscerally, that it becomes almost painful to watch. And the dream sequence, where SpongeBob's house catches fire and everything is telling him to write the essay, is this surreal, genuinely anxiety-inducing piece of animation that has no business being in a cartoon about a sponge. I've rewatched this episode probably 6 times putting this together, and every time the dream sequence starts, I feel my own stress levels spike. That's how good the show was at translating universal human experiences into the Bikini Bottom framework. Here's one more before we go even deeper. Frankendoodle, Season 2, Episode 14, Second Segment, aired January 21st, 2002. SpongeBob and Patrick find a magic pencil that fell from the surface, and SpongeBob uses it to draw a crude, 2-dimensional version of himself called Doodlebob. And Doodlebob goes berserk. He's wild, chaotic, violent, a creature made of pure, artistic impulse, with no conscience or restraint. And the metaphor there is so rich that I'm amazed more people don't talk about it. SpongeBob literally creates something in his own image, and it turns into a monster. It's a Frankenstein story, obviously. The name gives it away. But it's also about the act of creation itself. When you make something, when you bring an idea into the world, you lose control of it. Doodlebob doesn't belong to SpongeBob. He's his own thing. And the fact that a kids show encoded a meditation on art, creation, and the loss of authorial control into an episode about a magic pencil, that's the kind of thing that keeps me up at night, in the best way. Alright, I said we were going deeper, and I meant it. This is where the iceberg gets cold. This is the mid-depth, the territory where only dedicated fans have been, and even they might have missed some of this. Let me talk about the episode Just One Bite. Season 3, Episode 3, First Segment, aired in 2001. The premise is simple. SpongeBob wants Squidward to try a Krabby Patty. Squidward refuses, claims he's never eaten one, and SpongeBob is horrified. The episode follows SpongeBob's increasingly desperate attempts to get Squidward to take one bite. But here's the detail that most people know, but not everyone understands the significance of. There's a scene that was cut from this episode after its initial airing. In the original version, Squidward tries to sneak into the Krusty Krab at night to eat a Krabby Patty in secret. He trips a security alarm, and a bucket of gasoline falls on him. Then another bucket falls. Then a robot arm strikes a match, and Squidward gets set on fire. Twice. The scene was removed from reruns after September 11th, 2001, and Nickelodeon has continued to air the edited version ever since. And I think the removal of that scene is significant not just for what it tells us about content sensitivity, but for what it tells us about how much the show changed after 9/11. SpongeBob aired through one of the most traumatic periods in American history, and the network was suddenly looking at every episode through a different lens. Scenes that were darkly funny before September 11th became potentially upsetting after it. And that kind of cultural context is something that iceberg discussions often miss. The show didn't exist in a vacuum. It existed in the real world, and the real world shaped what was allowed to be funny. Now let me get into something that I've been wanting to talk about for a while. The banned episodes. And I don't mean banned in the way that internet clickbait usually means it. I mean episodes that have been genuinely pulled from rotation on Nickelodeon and removed from streaming platforms. The big one is Midlife Crustacean, Season 3, Episode 15, second segment. This episode was pulled from Nickelodeon's rotation in 2018 and removed from Paramount Plus in 2021. It's one of the only SpongeBob episodes that isn't available on the streaming platform. And the reason is a scene where Mr. Krabs, SpongeBob, and Patrick go on what they call a certain nighttime raid on someone's undergarments. The scene ends with Mr. Krabs discovering they've raided his own mother's drawer, and she grounds him. For years, this was just a funny gag. Kids didn't get it. Adults did. But in the context of the Me Too and Time's Up movements, Nickelodeon decided the scene was inappropriate and pulled the entire episode. And look, I understand the reasoning, but I also think it raises an interesting question about retroactive content review. This episode aired in 2003. It ran in reruns for 15 years without anyone at the network flagging it. The culture changed, and the episode suddenly became problematic. And I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying it's wild, because it means that the meaning of a SpongeBob episode isn't fixed. It shifts with the culture around it. What was funny in 2003 became uncomfortable in 2018. And that's true of so much more than just one episode. There's also Quarantined Crab, which was banned in America initially because of its depiction of quarantine during the COVID-19 pandemic. It was released in other countries, starting with France on May 6th, 2020, and didn't air in the United States until April 29th, 2022. The timing was just terrible. An episode about a quarantine situation was ready to air right as the entire world went into actual quarantine, and Nickelodeon made the call to hold it. And again, I understand the decision. But the fact that a cartoon about talking sea creatures was considered too sensitive because it echoed real-world trauma tells you something about how deeply SpongeBob is embedded in American culture. It's not just a show, it's a cultural barometer. When SpongeBob can't air an episode because reality got too close, that's a sign of how much the show matters. And while we're here, let me talk about another episode that straddles the line between comedy and something much darker in a way that I find endlessly fascinating. Bubble Buddy. Season 2, Episode 3, second segment. SpongeBob creates a friend out of a bubble after Patrick, Sandy, and Squidward are all too busy to hang out with him. And for most of the episode, Bubble Buddy is treated like a real character, except he's a bubble. SpongeBob takes him everywhere. He orders food for him at the Krusty Krab. He takes him to the beach. And the people of Bikini Bottom get increasingly frustrated because this bubble is causing real problems. He leaves a huge tip of bubble money. He sends back food at the restaurant. He buries a guy at the beach, and the tide comes in. And here's the part that everyone remembers, but nobody fully unpacks. The fish who got buried at the beach, the tide comes in, and the other characters watch and move on. The show just casually suggests that someone may have drowned because of a bubble, and it plays it as a throwaway background gag. The audience is supposed to laugh because it's absurd, and we do. But there's this little part of your brain that goes, wait, did they just? And then the show has already moved on. That willingness to let genuinely dark implications exist in the margins, to let the audience catch them or not catch them, is one of the defining characteristics of the Golden Age. The show didn't explain its jokes. It trusted you. And then at the end of the episode, Bubble Buddy comes alive. He talks. He moves. He's been a sentient being the entire time. He thanks SpongeBob, floats away, and the episode ends. And the implication is staggering. This character, who we assumed was just SpongeBob, projecting personality onto an inanimate bubble, was actually alive and conscious for every single thing that happened. He chose to be passive. He chose to let SpongeBob control the interaction. He chose to stay silent while people got angry and frustrated. Why? The show doesn't say. It just lets Bubble Buddy float away, leaving you with this bizarre, unsettling feeling that the world of Bikini Bottom contains sentient entities that choose not to reveal themselves. That's a deep-level existential horror buried inside an episode about a bubble. I actually have a theory about this that I've never heard anyone else bring up. I think the reason banned and censored SpongeBob episodes fascinate people so much isn't really about the content itself. It's about the gap between what we thought the show was and what it actually contained. When you hear that a SpongeBob episode was banned, there's this cognitive dissonance. SpongeBob is supposed to be safe. It's supposed to be the thing you watch when you want to feel like everything is okay. And learning that some of it was too much, that there were lines even SpongeBob crossed, that disrupts the comfort. And I think people are drawn to that disruption. They want to see the edge cases. They want to know where the line is. Because if SpongeBob has a line, then maybe the show is more real than they thought. Maybe it's not just comfort food. Maybe it's something that actually engages with the world in a way that has consequences. We're getting deeper. If you've made it this far, you already know this isn't a light video. And honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way. Because the deeper you go into SpongeBob, the more rewarding it gets. So let me keep pulling at threads. I want to go on a tangent for a second, because this is something I keep thinking about and I need to get it out. The thing about SpongeBob is that it rewards rewatching in a way that almost no other animated show does. Every single time, you catch a visual gag or a background detail you missed. I've been rewatching the first 3 seasons for this video, and I swear I noticed things on the 15th viewing that I'd never caught before. There's background fish having conversations you can barely hear. There's signs in the Krusty Krab that change between scenes. There's visual puns in the architecture of Bikini Bottom. The show is so dense with detail that it's basically impossible to absorb it all in one viewing. And I think that density is deliberate. Hillenberg wanted the show to be rewatchable. He wanted people to come back and discover new things. And the fact that this strategy worked, that people are still discovering new details in episodes that aired over 25 years ago, shows you how carefully the show was constructed during the Golden Age. And you know what? There's something I want to address directly. If you're listening to this right now and thinking, come on, it's just a kid's cartoon. You're overanalyzing it. I hear you. I get that. But here's my pushback. SpongeBob SquarePants was created by a man with a master's degree in experimental animation and a background in marine biology. He staffed his show with CalArts graduates and people who came from Rocko's Modern Life, one of the most subversive Nickelodeon shows ever made. He fought with the network to protect his creative vision. He embedded real marine biology into the show's world. He hid adult humor in places kids would never find it. He structured episodes to work on multiple levels simultaneously. None of that happens by accident. None of that happens in a show that's just a cartoon. SpongeBob is dense because it was designed to be dense. And I think we owe it to Hillenberg's work to take it seriously, even when, especially when, it's also making us laugh at a starfish who lives under a rock. Let me talk about the music. The original music composition for SpongeBob SquarePants was done using a library of production music, much of it sourced from the Associated Production Music Library. And some of the most iconic musical moments in the show aren't original compositions at all. They're pre-existing library tracks that the sound team selected with incredible precision. The Hawaiian steel guitar riff that plays during transitions, that's a library track. The dramatic orchestral stings, library tracks. And yet they're so perfectly matched to the show's tone that most people assume they were written for SpongeBob. The show's sound design team, led by people who understood that music could do 60% of the comedic heavy lifting if you chose the right cue at the right moment, created one of the most distinctive sonic identities in television history using someone else's music. That's wild when you think about it. And then there's Sweet Victory, the song that plays during the climax of Band Geeks. Season 2, Episode 15, second segment, aired September 7th, 2001. Written by David Glenn Isley and Bob Kulick. The episode was directed by Aaron Springer and written by Springer, C.H. Greenblatt, and Meriwether Williams. And the story behind Band Geeks is the story of Squidward finally winning, for once. His rival, Squilliam Fancyson, challenges him to form a marching band to perform at the Bubble Bowl. Rehearsals are a disaster. Everything goes wrong. And then, at the last moment, the band transforms into a rock group and performs Sweet Victory. And it's this massive, triumphant, genuinely emotional climax that has no punchline, no reversal, no joke undercutting the moment. Squidward wins. SpongeBob supports him. The crowd goes wild, and the episode ends. The show lets Squidward have his moment. And after hundreds of episodes of watching this character get humiliated, disappointed, and beaten down, that one moment of genuine triumph is earned in a way that most prestige dramas can only dream of. Band Geeks holds a 9.8 out of 10 on IMDb, based on over 6,000 user votes, making it the highest rated SpongeBob episode ever, and it aired to an audience of 4.08 million households. Those numbers matter because they tell you that this wasn't a niche thing. Millions of people experienced Squidward's victory in real time, and it stuck with them. And I know I keep circling back to Band Geeks, and I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry, because this episode deserves every second of analysis it gets. The reason Band Geeks works as well as it does isn't just the Sweet Victory performance. It's the structure. The episode spends its entire runtime establishing failure. Everything goes wrong. The band can't play. They fight. They literally destroy each other. Squidward's rival, Squilliam Fancyson, voiced by D. Bradley Baker, is everything Squidward wants to be. Successful, respected, talented. And Squilliam's presence turns the stakes from, will the concert go well, to, will Squidward be humiliated in front of the person he most envies. The entire emotional weight of the episode sits on Squidward's shoulders. And when the band transforms and Sweet Victory starts playing, the release is enormous. Not because the song is great, though it is, but because we've spent 11 minutes watching Squidward suffer, and now, for one shining moment, he gets to win. He gets to stand on that stage and be the person he always believed he could be. And the look on his face during that performance, the sheer disbelieving joy, is one of the most earned emotional moments in television history. I mean that. Not in animation, not in kids' TV, in television, period. And the Sweet Victory story doesn't end there. It connects to one of the most emotionally charged moments in SpongeBob's cultural legacy. In November 2018, Stephen Hillenberg passed away from complications of ALS. He'd revealed his diagnosis in 2017 at age 55. He said at the time that he wanted people to hear directly from him, and that he intended to continue working on the series for as long as he was able. He died on November 26, 2018, at age 57, and the internet's response was something I've never quite seen for any other creative figure. It wasn't just sadness. It was personal. People felt like they'd lost a member of their family. Because for so many of us, SpongeBob wasn't just a show we watched. It was the show. The one that shaped our sense of humor, our worldview, our ability to find joy in stupid things. And Hillenberg was the guy who made that possible. After his passing, a Change.org petition calling for Sweet Victory to be performed at Super Bowl 53's halftime show gathered over 1.2 million signatures. The idea was simple: honor Hillenberg's legacy by playing the most beloved song from the most beloved episode of the most beloved cartoon ever made. And there were teases. Maroon 5, who was performing the halftime show, posted a video clip that included a flash of SpongeBob footage. NFL teasers hinted at a tribute. Fans were electric. This was going to be the moment. And then it wasn't. At the actual Super Bowl on February 3rd, 2019, a short clip of the Sweet Victory performance appeared on the stadium's big screen. SpongeBob, Squidward, the whole band, for maybe 15 seconds. And then it cut to Travis Scott performing Sicko Mode. That was it. 15 seconds. No Sweet Victory, no tribute. Just a bait and switch that felt, to millions of fans, like a punch in the gut. The backlash was enormous. Twitter erupted. People felt betrayed. And the reason it hurt so much is that Sweet Victory wasn't just a song from a cartoon anymore. After Hillenberg's death, it had become something sacred to an entire generation. It was the song that represented everything SpongeBob meant to them: joy, perseverance, the idea that the underdog can win if they try hard enough. And it was used as a transition into a completely unrelated performance. They did play the full song in the stadium after the game, with a dedication to Hillenberg. But by then, the damage was done. The moment had passed. And I still think about that. I still think about what it would have meant to hear Sweet Victory performed live at the Super Bowl, at the biggest stage in American entertainment, as a tribute to a marine biologist from Oklahoma who created a cartoon about a sponge. It would have been perfect, and we didn't get it. Okay, I need to take a breath, because we're about to descend into the real deep water, the abyss, the part of the iceberg that's going to change how you think about this show. But before we go there, let me cover something important, the spin-offs. Because the story of SpongeBob's spin-offs is really the story of what happens to a creative vision when its creator is no longer there to protect it. In 2009, Hillenberg gave an interview where he was asked about the possibility of spin-off shows. His answer was clear. He said the show is about SpongeBob. He's the core element, and it's about how he relates to the other characters. He specifically mentioned that Patrick by himself might be a bit too much. He said he didn't see any spin-offs. That was his position. In 2009, he was alive. He was clear. And then, in June 2019, 7 months after Hillenberg's death, Nickelodeon announced Camp Corral, SpongeBob's Under Years, a CG animated prequel spin-off. Paul Tibbitt, who had been the showrunner from season 4 through 9, responded on Twitter with something that I think is worth hearing. He said he didn't mean any disrespect to his colleagues working on the show, that they were good people and talented artists, but he called it greedy, lazy executive decision-making. And he said they all knew full well that Steve would have hated this. That's a direct quote from a guy who ran the show for years. They all knew full well Steve would have hated this. And then came the Patrick Star Show, greenlit after Hillenberg's death, despite his 2009 comments about not wanting spin-offs, particularly one focused on Patrick. And look, there are conflicting claims about whether Hillenberg was aware of these projects before he passed. Some sources suggest he may have seen early development on Camp Corral. Others dispute this. Regarding the Patrick Star Show, there's no credible evidence that Hillenberg signed off on it. And I think this matters not because the spin-offs are terrible. They're not for me, but other people enjoy them, and that's fine. It matters because it represents a fundamental shift in what SpongeBob is. Under Hillenberg, SpongeBob was an expression of one person's vision. It was specific. It was intentional. Every detail was there for a reason. Under Nickelodeon's post-Hillenberg stewardship, SpongeBob became a franchise, a brand, something to be expanded and monetized. And there's a difference between those two things. A big one. Remember what I said earlier about the painting of the ocean inside the underwater restaurant? That was a detail that existed because someone with a very specific sense of humor put it there. The painting doesn't advance the plot. It doesn't serve a commercial purpose. It's just a funny, strange, quietly brilliant observation about the absurdity of the world Hillenberg created. And that kind of detail, the kind that exists purely because someone cared enough to include it, is the thing that gets lost when a show becomes a franchise. Not immediately, not all at once, but slowly, imperceptibly, like the tide going out. And I need to stop here and address something because it's been nagging at me. The relationship between Nickelodeon and SpongeBob is one of the strangest creator-corporation dynamics in entertainment history. On one hand, Nickelodeon gave Hillenberg the platform, the budget, and the initial creative freedom to make something extraordinary. Without Nickelodeon, SpongeBob doesn't exist. Period. On the other hand, Nickelodeon is the entity that forced the show to continue after Hillenberg wanted to end it, that squeezed it for merchandise revenue, that greenlit spin-offs after the creator explicitly said he didn't want them. It's both the thing that made SpongeBob possible and the thing that threatens to destroy what makes it special. And I don't think there's a clean villain in this story. Nickelodeon is a corporation. Corporations exist to make money. SpongeBob makes money. The logic is simple, but the collateral damage of that logic, the erosion of creative vision, the commodification of art, the transformation of a personal creation into a franchise, is real. And it's the kind of thing that I think Hillenberg grappled with for his entire career. How do you protect something you love when the people who own it don't love it the same way you do? How do you keep the soul of a thing alive when the body keeps getting bigger? I don't know if he ever found the answer, but the fact that he kept trying, that he came back to the show even after stepping away, that he continued to care about the quality of individual episodes, even when the franchise had become a behemoth, tells you something about who he was as a person and as an artist. And here's the thing that makes all of this even more complicated. The later seasons, even the ones that fans consider weaker, still matter to a whole generation of kids who grew up on them. There are people in their teens and early 20s right now for whom Season 6, SpongeBob, is their SpongeBob. That's the version of the show that shaped their sense of humor, that they quote with their friends, that they feel nostalgic about. And I think the Golden Age purists, myself included sometimes, need to reckon with that. Our SpongeBob isn't the only SpongeBob. The show has existed long enough to create multiple generations of fans, each with their own golden age. And while I maintain that the first 3 seasons represent the show at its creative peak, I also think there's something beautiful about the fact that SpongeBob has been elastic enough to mean different things to different people across different eras. That's not a weakness. That's a sign of how durable the core concept is. A sponge who loves his job and his friends. You can build almost anything on top of that foundation, and it still works. It still resonates. It still connects. All right, the abyss. The deepest part of the iceberg. The stuff that genuinely makes you look at SpongeBob differently. Let me start with the creepypasta, because it's actually more interesting from a cultural analysis perspective than most people give it credit for. The most famous SpongeBob creepypasta is called Squidward's Suicide, also known as Red Mist. It first appeared on the paranormal board of 7chan, posted by an anonymous user claiming to be a Nickelodeon intern. The story describes a supposed lost episode, originally intended as the premiere of Season 4, in which an internship group views footage that becomes increasingly disturbing. It starts normal enough, Squidward performing at a concert, but then the tone shifts dramatically, and the episode descends into disturbing imagery and sounds that weren't authorized. The creepypasta is notable for popularizing the term hyper-realistic in horror fiction, and it spawned an entire subgenre of lost episode creepypastas, most of which were terrible. But Squidward's Suicide itself tapped into something real. It works because it targets the gap between what SpongeBob looks like on the surface and what we sense is underneath. The cheerful colors, the silly voices, the relentless optimism. It all functions as a kind of mask, and the creepypasta rips that mask off and asks, what if the darkness was actually there, embedded in the show, hidden where nobody would think to look? And here's what's fascinating to me. The creepypasta isn't real, obviously. There was no lost episode, no disturbing footage, but the show itself has moments that are genuinely unsettling without any fictional embellishment needed. I already talked about Nasty Patty and the body hiding plot, but there's more. There's Rock Bottom, Season 1, Episode 17, second segment, which aired March 15th, 2000. SpongeBob takes a bus to the wrong stop and ends up in Rock Bottom, a deep-sea city in the abyssopelagic zone, and the atmosphere of that episode is genuinely alienating. The creatures speak in a language SpongeBob can't understand, with these blowing raspberry sounds between every word. The architecture is dark and angular. Every time SpongeBob tries to leave, the bus pulls away just as he turns his back. The episode creates this Kafka-esque sense of being trapped in a place that operates by rules you don't understand, surrounded by beings who are fundamentally different from you. And the show plays it for comedy. SpongeBob's confused expressions are hilarious, but underneath the comedy, there's real anxiety. The kind of anxiety that comes from being lost in a place that doesn't care about you. And that was Season 1, the first season. And this connects to something I've been wanting to say about the show's handling of horror more broadly. Because SpongeBob doesn't just do horror as a one-off. It weaves horror elements through the entire series in ways that most people don't clock. There are the obvious ones. The hash-slinging slasher, the Flying Dutchman, the nightmarish creatures of Rock Bottom. But there are subtler moments of genuine unease, scattered throughout the Golden Age, that stick with you longer than any jump scare. The close-up paintings. You know the ones. These hyper-detailed, photorealistic paintings that flash on screen during intense moments. A fish's face, rendered in gruesome detail. SpongeBob's eyes bulging with the veins visible. These close-ups break the visual language of the show so violently that they function almost like jump scares. You're watching smooth, fluid animation, and then suddenly you're looking at something that belongs in a medical textbook. It's jarring, it's uncomfortable, and it's one of the most distinctive visual techniques in animation history. No other show has made close-up detail a signature horror element the way SpongeBob has. And then there's the way the show handles isolation. We talked about Rock Bottom and the Kafka-esque experience of being stranded in an alien place. But isolation shows up everywhere in the Golden Age. SpongeBob is alone in his pineapple at night. Squidward is alone in his head. Patrick is alone in his intellectual limitations. These characters are constantly surrounded by each other, but fundamentally isolated by the boundaries of their own consciousness. They can't fully understand each other. SpongeBob can't understand why Squidward doesn't love his job. Squidward can't understand why SpongeBob does. Patrick can't understand most things. And Sandy can't understand why nobody appreciates science the way she does. The show is populated by characters who are perpetually reaching for connection and perpetually falling short, and the comedy comes from the gap between the reaching and the failing. This is one of those episodes I think about randomly at like 2 a.m., and I think it applies to almost everything in the show's first 3 seasons. Every episode, at its core, is about the gap between what a character wants and what they actually get. SpongeBob wants to deliver a pizza. He gets a customer who yells at him. Squidward wants a day off. He gets paranoia. SpongeBob wants to make a friend. He gets Doodlebob. Patrick wants chocolate. He gets scammed. Mr. Krabs wants to save money. He nearly commits what he thinks is a felony. The comedy is always in the gap, and the emotion is always in how the character responds to the gap. Do they rage against it? Like Squidward? Do they embrace it? Like SpongeBob? Do they try to profit from it? Like Mr. Krabs? The gap is universal. The response is personal, and the show understood that from the very beginning. That gap is where all the best SpongeBob humor lives. Not in the punchline, but in the space between the setup and the payoff. In the moment where you see a character trying and failing to bridge the distance between themselves and someone else. Or consider Squidville, Season 2, Episode 6, second segment. Squidward discovers a gated community populated entirely by other squids, all playing clarinet, all riding bikes, all living identical lives. It's Squidward's paradise. Everything he's ever wanted. No SpongeBob, no Patrick, just cultured, like-minded individuals. And at first, it's great, but slowly, Squidward starts to go stir-crazy. The sameness, the predictability, the absolute lack of chaos or surprise, it suffocates him. And he ends up destroying the whole place with a reef blower in a manic episode that would be alarming if it weren't so cathartic. The episode is essentially a critique of conformity, of the idea that getting everything you think you want will make you happy. Squidward wanted order. He got it, and it nearly broke him. The implication is that the chaos of Bikini Bottom, SpongeBob's annoyingness, Patrick's stupidity, Mr. Krabs' cheapness, all of it is what keeps Squidward alive. Without friction, there's no spark. Without conflict, there's no meaning. That's a genuinely philosophical insight hidden inside a cartoon about squids. Let me talk about Chocolate with Nuts for a second. Season 3, Episode 12, first segment, aired June 1st, 2002. Written by Paul Tibbitt, Kaz, Kent Osborne, and Meriwether Williams. SpongeBob and Patrick decide to become door-to-door chocolate salesmen after SpongeBob gets Squidward's Fancy Living Digest magazine by mistake. And the episode is essentially a satire of capitalism, consumerism, and the American dream. SpongeBob and Patrick try to sell chocolate using various marketing techniques, starting honest, and gradually becoming more deceptive as they learn that people respond to hype more than substance. They lie about the chocolate being a health product. They exaggerate its benefits, and they encounter a fish who scams them repeatedly, selling them candy bar bag carrying bags. The episode is hilarious, obviously. The guy screaming chocolate is one of the most iconic gags in the entire series, but it's also a surprisingly sharp commentary on how salesmanship works, on how the distance between marketing and con artistry is thinner than anyone wants to admit. And the ending, where SpongeBob and Patrick use all their money to take 2 elderly women out for a fancy dinner at a restaurant, is the show's way of saying that the only honest transaction is generosity. Everything else is just hustle. I want to go even deeper into the character analysis because I think there are aspects of these characters that don't get discussed enough. Let me talk about Mr. Krabs, Eugene Krabs, voiced by Clancy Brown, an accomplished dramatic actor who brings this deep, gravelly, part pirate, part grumpy boss energy to the character. And Mr. Krabs is fascinating because the show never quite lets you pin him down morally. On the surface, he's the greedy boss. He pays SpongeBob and Squidward next to nothing. He nickels and dimes everything. He once had a heart attack because he lost a dime. That's the joke. But then you get episodes like Born Again Krabs, where he literally goes to Davy Jones's locker and bargains for his life. Or episodes where he shows genuine fatherly concern for SpongeBob. And Dying for Pie, Season 2, Episode 6, first segment, aired January 27th, 2001, is maybe the best example. Squidward unknowingly gives SpongeBob a pie that's actually a bomb. When he realizes what he's done, when he thinks SpongeBob has hours to live, he tries to make SpongeBob's last day meaningful. He does everything SpongeBob wants. He watches the sunset with him. And the moment where Squidward breaks down thinking SpongeBob is about to die is one of the most emotionally raw moments in the entire series. The pie was never eaten. SpongeBob was fine, and the bomb goes off in a spectacular explosion at the end. But that doesn't undo the emotion. For most of the episode, Squidward genuinely believed his coworker was dying, and he responded with love. Not reluctant love, not sarcastic love, real, desperate, terrified love. That's the character underneath the grumpy exterior, and the show made you feel it without ever being sentimental about it. Then there's Patrick Star, voiced by Bill Fagerbakke. And Patrick is the character who's easiest to underestimate because his whole deal is being stupid. But the show, especially in the early seasons, used Patrick's stupidity in incredibly clever ways. Patrick isn't just random. His logic follows its own internal consistency. When he says something nonsensical, it usually makes perfect sense within the framework of his own understanding. He's not stupid in the way that bad writing makes characters stupid, where they do dumb things because the plot needs them to. He's stupid in a very specific, very human way. He operates on feelings and instincts, not logic, and sometimes that makes him accidentally wise. Like in The Secret Box, when SpongeBob is going crazy trying to figure out what's inside Patrick's secret box, and Patrick just sits there, completely at peace, because he already knows what's inside, and he's fine with it. Patrick's relationship with knowledge is fundamentally different from every other character. He doesn't need to understand things. He just needs to experience them. And there's something almost Buddhist about that. This idea of existing fully in the present without the anxiety of analysis. I don't think Hillenberg was deliberately writing a Buddhist character, but the fact that Patrick can be read that way speaks to the depth of the character work. And Sandy Cheeks, voiced by Carolyn Lawrence, the Texas-born squirrel who lives in an air dome at the bottom of the ocean. Sandy is the show's outsider, the character who literally doesn't belong in Bikini Bottom's ecosystem. She breathes air. She's a land mammal. She has to wear a special suit to exist in the underwater world. And I think Sandy is underrated in discussions about the show's themes because she represents something really specific: the immigrant experience. She left her home, Texas, and moved to a completely alien environment where she's the only one of her kind. She has to adapt. She has to prove herself. She has to wear a suit just to survive. And the show explores this through comedy, obviously. But there are moments where Sandy's isolation is palpable. She misses home. She defends her identity fiercely. And the other characters sometimes don't understand what she's going through because they've never had to adapt to a world that wasn't built for them. I think about the episode Pressure, Season 2, Episode 12, first segment, which aired in 2001, where Sandy gets into a competition with the sea creatures about who's better, land animals or sea animals. And it's played as a fun rivalry, but underneath it, there's this real tension about belonging. Sandy has to prove she's just as good as everyone else, over and over, because she's different. And that reads differently when you think about it in terms of real-world experiences of people who move to new countries, new cultures, new environments where they don't quite fit. Okay, we need to go to the darkest layer, the bottom of the iceberg, the stuff that sits at the very foundation of what SpongeBob is, and that most people never think about. Let me talk about the show's relationship with existential dread, because it's there. It's always been there. From the very first season, SpongeBob SquarePants has been grappling with questions about mortality, meaninglessness, and the search for purpose. And it does it so smoothly, so casually, that you can watch the entire series without ever consciously noticing. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. Consider the structure of Bikini Bottom itself. Every character has a fixed role. SpongeBob is the fry cook. Squidward is the cashier. Mr. Krabs is the boss. They do the same thing every day. Every morning, SpongeBob wakes up, feeds Gary, goes to work, makes Krabby Patties, goes home, goes to sleep. The next day, same thing. There's no promotion coming. There's no retirement plan. There's no narrative arc where SpongeBob gradually works his way up the corporate ladder. He's a fry cook. He'll always be a fry cook. And he's happy about it. And the show wants you to ask, is that okay? Is contentment in a static life a sign of wisdom or a sign of something else? Because Squidward looks at SpongeBob and sees a fool. He sees someone who's given up on anything bigger. But SpongeBob looks at his life and sees abundance. He has a job he loves, a friend who adores him, a pet who depends on him, and a world full of wonder. Who's right? The guy who's content with what he has, or the guy who's miserable because he wants more? The show's refusal to answer that question definitively is, I think, its deepest achievement. Hillenberg wasn't interested in telling you how to live. He was interested in showing you two ways of living and letting you sit with the tension between them. SpongeBob's joy is real. Squidward's pain is real. Neither one negates the other. And in a kid's show, where the temptation is always to resolve things neatly, to say, be happy like SpongeBob and everything will be fine. The fact that the show lets Squidward's misery coexist with SpongeBob's happiness without ever fully resolving it is a mark of genuine artistic maturity. And then there's the mortality stuff. SpongeBob lives in a world where characters regularly get blown up, flattened, burned, frozen, and otherwise destroyed, only to be perfectly fine in the next scene. The show operates on cartoon logic, where nothing has permanent consequences. But every now and then, it breaks that rule. The first movie genuinely puts SpongeBob and Patrick in mortal peril. They're captured. They're going to be turned into decorative objects. And the scene where they think they're going to die, where they accept it, is played with total sincerity. No jokes. No winking at the camera. Just two characters facing the end. And the show earns that moment because we've spent years watching these characters live their silly, inconsequential lives. And suddenly, the stakes are real. The contrast between SpongeBob's usual immortality and these rare moments of genuine vulnerability is devastating precisely because it's so rare. I think this is actually what the show's about at its core. Not friendship, not humor, not sea creatures. It's about the tension between lightness and weight, between the colorful surface and the dark bottom, between the painting of the ocean on the wall and the actual ocean outside. SpongeBob SquarePants is a show that holds both things at once, the silly and the profound, the comic and the tragic, and refuses to choose between them. And that's why it works for 5-year-olds and for adults who are watching it at 2 in the morning trying to fall asleep. Because both things are true. Life is absurd and funny and full of slapstick chaos. And life is also lonely and repetitive and kind of terrifying when you think about it too hard. SpongeBob doesn't resolve that contradiction. It lives inside it. Let me go further. Because there are aspects of the show's production history that sit in the deepest part of the iceberg, and they connect to everything we've been talking about. And here's another deep level detail that I think deserves more attention. The way the show handles dreams and the subconscious. SpongeBob episodes regularly dip into dream sequences and nightmare scenarios, and they're always more revealing than they initially appear. We already talked about the dream in Procrastination, but think about Sleepy Time, Season 1, Episode 15, first segment. SpongeBob accidentally travels into his friend's dreams while sleeping, and each dream reveals something profound about the dreamer. Squidward dreams of performing to an adoring audience. Patrick dreams of riding a kiddie ride at a theme park. And the thing is, these dreams aren't just jokes. They're psychological portraits. Squidward's dream tells you that beneath the bitterness, all he wants is recognition. Patrick's dream tells you that beneath the emptiness, all he wants is simple pleasure. Sandy's dream tells you that she misses Texas, mister. Crab's dream tells you that he sees money as the solution to everything, even in his subconscious. The episode is essentially a personality test administered through animation, and it works because the writers understood these characters deeply enough to know what they would dream about. That's character work that most prestige dramas can't match. And then there's the Gary factor. Gary the snail is SpongeBob's pet, but the show frequently hints that Gary might be the most intelligent character in Bikini Bottom. He meows like a cat, but the meows seem to contain genuine communication that SpongeBob understands. In Sleepy Time, Gary's dream takes place in a vast library, and Gary speaks eloquently about philosophy and literature. The implication is that Gary has a rich interior life that he can't express through the limitations of snail communication. He's trapped inside a body that can only meow, and the world assumes he's a simple pet, but inside, he contains multitudes. And this is another one of those SpongeBob ideas that I find deeply affecting the more I think about it. How many people in the real world are assumed to be simple because they can't express their complexity? How many Garys are out there, filled with knowledge and passion and insight, dismissed because the world only sees the shell? The voice actors' contributions to SpongeBob can't be overstated, and I don't think most people appreciate how much of the show's identity comes from their performances. Tom Kenny didn't just voice SpongeBob, he gave him a soul. That laugh, that eternal optimism, the way Kenny can shift from manic enthusiasm to quiet sincerity in the space of a single line, that's not just acting. It's inhabiting a character at a level that most live-action performers never achieve. And Kenny has said that he considers SpongeBob to be a genuinely good person, not a character trait, but an actual moral quality that he brings to every line reading. When SpongeBob says something kind, Kenny means it, and you can feel that. Roger Bumpass, as Squidward, brings this incredible depth to what could have been a one-note grumpy character. Listen to the way Bumpass reads Squidward's lines in Band Geeks. the resignation, the hope, the terror. There's an entire emotional arc happening in his voice that the script barely hints at. Bumpass received a Daytime Emmy nomination in 2012 for the role, and honestly, the fact that it was only a nomination and not a win tells you something about how animation voice work is still undervalued by the industry. Bill Fagerbakke gives Patrick this perfect combination of emptiness and warmth. Patrick is supposed to be the dumbest character on the show, and Fagerbakke plays him that way. But there's always this undertone of genuine sweetness. When Patrick says something stupid, it's never mean-spirited. He's not an idiot in a way that makes you cringe. He's an idiot in a way that makes you love him. And that's harder to do than it sounds. Clancy Brown as Mr. Krabs, Carolyn Lawrence as Sandy, Mr. Lawrence as Plankton. Every single one of these performances is doing more than the writing asks of it. They're adding dimensions that aren't on the page. And I think the reason the show feels different when you listen closely is because these actors were given room to bring their own humanity to characters who are, on paper, just cartoons. Hillenberg cast people, not voices, and that made all the difference. Now, I want to talk about something that I've been circling around this whole time, the Renaissance. Because the SpongeBob story doesn't end with the decline of the post-movie era. There's a third act. Around season 9, something shifted. Specifically, season 9, B. Steven Hillenberg came back. Not in the advisory, reviewing episodes from a distance capacity he'd maintained since 2004. He came back in a more active, hands-on role. This was after production on the SpongeBob movie, Sponge Out of Water, the second film, which released in 2015. Hillenberg had said in an interview that he would return to the show following the film, and the difference was immediate. The second half of season 9, episodes like Lost in Bikini Bottom and others, felt like a return to form. The humor got sharper. The characters felt more like themselves again. The visual storytelling regained some of its precision. Fans call this the post-sequel era, or the Renaissance era, and it runs roughly from season 9, B through season 12. And the fact that Hillenberg's increased involvement coincided with a noticeable improvement in quality tells you everything about the connection between creative vision and output. The show needed him, not because the other writers were bad, but because he was the one who knew, on a bone-deep level, what SpongeBob was supposed to feel like. And here's the heartbreaking part. The Renaissance was happening while Hillenberg was sick. He revealed his ALS diagnosis in 2017. He continued to work on the show. He continued to care. And when he died on November 26, 2018, the show was in the middle of its best creative stretch since the original 3 seasons. He didn't get to see the full arc of the Renaissance. He didn't get to see how fans would rally around Sweet Victory in his honor. He was 57 years old, and the show he created was once again approaching something close to its best, and then he was gone. I think about this a lot, more than I probably should. I've been working on this video for weeks, and every day I find myself coming back to this same feeling. This sense that we lost something when Hillenberg left, and that the thing we lost can't be replaced, and that understanding what we lost is maybe the most important thing any SpongeBob analysis can do, because it's not about nostalgia. I'm not sitting here saying the old episodes were better just because I watched them as a kid. I've rewatched them as an adult, with analytical eyes, and they hold up. They're structurally sound. They're emotionally sophisticated. They're comedically precise. The first 3 seasons of SpongeBob SquarePants are among the best television ever produced, in any genre, for any audience. And the reason is that a single person with a specific vision made them that way. I think about what it means to create something that outlives you. Hillenberg made SpongeBob in the mid-90s, a marine biologist with a dream of making a cartoon about the ocean. And now, in 2026, SpongeBob is one of the most recognized fictional characters on the planet. He's a global cultural phenomenon. He's spawned memes that define how an entire generation communicates. The mocking SpongeBob meme, the imagination rainbow meme, the "Ite Emma head out" meme. These aren't just internet jokes. They're the visual language of a generation. A writer for Know Your Meme told Time magazine that nostalgia and the fact that SpongeBob's audience grew up to become the first generation of meme creators contributed to the show's outsized presence in internet culture. And Aja Romano at Vox declared in 2019 that SpongeBob memes had come to rule internet culture entirely. And all of this, every meme, every reference, every late-night rewatch, every video essay including this one, goes back to a guy who studied marine biology and fell in love with making people laugh. That's it. That's the whole iceberg. At the top, you've got a cartoon about a sponge. At the bottom, you've got a man's entire creative vision, his understanding of the ocean, his love of animation, His belief that you could make something genuinely thoughtful and genuinely silly at the same time. And I keep coming back to this point, but I think it's the key to everything. SpongeBob works because Hillenberg respected his audience. He never talked down to kids. He never dumbed things down for adults. He made the show he wanted to make, and he trusted that people would find it. And they did. Millions of them. Across decades. Across generations. Across the entire world. The storyboard for the show, the way episodes were constructed during the Golden Age, was fundamentally different from how most animated shows worked. SpongeBob used a storyboard-driven production process rather than a script-driven one. The writers would create story outlines, but the storyboard artists had enormous creative freedom to shape the visual gags, the timing, the comedic beats. That's why the humor feels so visual, so kinetic. It wasn't written on a page and then illustrated. It was drawn first, with the comedy emerging from the images. And that process, which Hillenberg brought over from his experience on Rocko's Modern Life, is part of why the early episodes feel so different from later seasons, where the production process became more standardized. The storyboard artists of the Golden Era, people like C.H. Greenblatt, Aaron Springer, and Meriwether Williams, were essentially co-creating each episode. The lines between writing and drawing were blurred, and the result was comedy that felt organic rather than constructed. Let me go back to the deep lore for a moment, because there's something I haven't covered yet that I think belongs at the bottom of the iceberg. The show's relationship with loneliness. SpongeBob SquarePants is, at its core, a show about lonely people finding each other. Think about it. Every main character is isolated in some fundamental way. SpongeBob lives alone in a pineapple with his pet snail. Patrick lives alone under a rock. Squidward lives alone in an Easter Island head. Mr. Krabs is a widower, or divorced. We're never quite told. Raising his whale daughter Pearl alone while running a restaurant. Sandy is the only land mammal in the entire ocean. Plankton's only companion is a computer he married. These are all fundamentally solitary beings, and the show is about the messy, chaotic, often painful ways they collide with each other. SpongeBob doesn't have friends because the universe handed them to him. He has friends because he refused to accept being alone. He forced his way into Squidward's life. He embraced Patrick's limitations instead of being put off by them. He found community in a place where, logically, there shouldn't be one. An underwater city populated by creatures who have no business interacting, let alone caring about each other. And I think that's why the show resonates so deeply with people who are watching it late at night. Because late at night, when you can't sleep, you're in your own version of Bikini Bottom. You're alone. The world is quiet. And you put on SpongeBob because somewhere in the back of your mind, you remember that this show understands what loneliness feels like. Not in a heavy, dramatic way, in a gentle way. In a way that says, yeah, the world is weird and you're stuck in it, but look, there are these people around you, and they're weird too. And if you're lucky and you're brave enough to care about them, you might find something that makes the weirdness worth it. There's an episode called I Had an Accident from season 3. SpongeBob breaks his butt while sandboarding and decides to never go outside again. He creates 3 imaginary friends, Chip, Penny, and used napkin. A chip, a penny, and a used napkin. And he insists they're all the companionship he needs. Sandy and Patrick try everything to get him outside, and nothing works. The episode pushes SpongeBob's agoraphobia to absurd extremes, and then resolves it in the most SpongeBob way possible, with a gorilla attack. A live-action gorilla in a SpongeBob episode. And the gorilla stuffs Sandy and Patrick into a bag, and SpongeBob has to choose between the safety of his pineapple and saving his friends. And of course, he goes outside. Of course he does. Because for all of SpongeBob's quirks and fears, he can't abandon the people he loves. His love for his friends is stronger than his fear of the world. And the show frames this not as a grand heroic moment, but as the most natural thing in the universe. Of course SpongeBob goes outside. What else would he do? He's SpongeBob. I want to come back around to something I mentioned at the very beginning, the painting of the ocean on the wall of the Krusty Krab, because I think it's the perfect metaphor for what Stephen Hillenberg created. SpongeBob SquarePants is a show about the ocean, set in the ocean, made by a man who studied the ocean, and yet the characters in it never think about the ocean. They go about their lives, frying burgers, playing clarinet badly, living under rocks, completely oblivious to the vastness of the world they inhabit. They have a painting of it on the wall, but they never look at it. They're too busy living. And isn't that exactly what we do? We live in an infinite universe, on a tiny planet, in bodies that will stop working someday, surrounded by mysteries we'll never solve. And we go to work. We argue with our neighbors. We order pizza. We worry about essays we haven't written. We're fish in the ocean, with a painting of the ocean on the wall, and we never look at it because we're too busy being alive. Hillenberg understood that. He understood that the comedy of existence isn't separate from the tragedy of it. They're the same thing. A sponge who lives in a pineapple under the sea is funny. A sponge who lives in a pineapple under the sea and finds genuine, unshakable joy in a life that a pessimist would call meaningless. That's something more than funny. That's philosophical. That's beautiful. That's SpongeBob. Here's something else that lives at the bottom of the iceberg: the show's treatment of Plankton. Sheldon J. Plankton, voiced by Mr. Lawrence, who also writes for the show. And Plankton is one of the most fascinating villain archetypes in television because he's not really a villain. He's a failure. His entire identity is built around trying to steal the Krabby Patty secret formula, and he never succeeds. Not once. In over 2 decades of trying, he has never achieved his one goal. And the show doesn't punish him for being evil. It punishes him for being small. His name is Plankton. He's a single-celled organism. He's the smallest character in Bikini Bottom, both literally and figuratively. And his wife, Karen, is a computer. He married a machine because no living creature would have him. There's something genuinely tragic about that, if you stop and think about it. Plankton's schemes are always elaborate, always ambitious, always doomed. And every failure pushes him further into the role of villain, even though what he really wants isn't world domination. He wants what Mr. Krabs has. He wants success. He wants customers. He wants to matter. Plankton is envy incarnate, but the thing about envy is that it's just desire, wearing an ugly mask. Strip away the villain costume, and Plankton is just a guy who wants to be important in a world that keeps reminding him he's not. And Mr. Krabs' greed, when you put it next to Plankton's envy, creates this incredible dynamic. They went to school together. They were friends once. And somewhere along the way, one of them got lucky and the other didn't. Krabs got the formula. Plankton didn't. And that single divergence, that one stroke of fortune, defined the rest of both their lives. Krabs became the successful businessman. Plankton became the bitter rival. The show is telling you that the line between success and failure is thinner than anyone wants to admit, and that once you end up on the wrong side of it, the system keeps you there. That's not just a cartoon dynamic. That's capitalism. And the fact that SpongeBob, a show watched by millions of children, explores this so consistently and so clearly without ever being preachy about it is remarkable. And while we're in the abyss, I want to bring up something else: Mrs. Puff, voiced by Mary Jo Catlett, SpongeBob's boating school teacher. On the surface, she's a patient, slightly exasperated educator who keeps trying and failing to teach SpongeBob how to drive. Classic sitcom dynamic. But when you look at Mrs. Puff's character arc across the full series, something genuinely disturbing emerges. Mrs. Puff lives in terror of SpongeBob, not mild annoyance. Terror. There are episodes where she fantasizes about SpongeBob being gone, where she has breakdowns at the thought of another day of teaching him, where she goes to extreme lengths to avoid having him in her class. And the show keeps framing her reactions as comedy, but the subtext is that Mrs. Puff is a person trapped in a professional relationship with someone who is, through no malice of his own, destroying her life. SpongeBob isn't trying to torment her. He genuinely wants to learn. He admires her. He respects her. And she can't get away from him. She's contractually, professionally, and socially obligated to keep teaching the one student who will never learn. And the longer the show runs, the more desperate she becomes. There's something in Mrs. Puff's trajectory that mirrors the broader themes of the show. She's another character who's trapped, another character who's stuck in a cycle. But unlike SpongeBob, who finds joy in his cycle, and unlike Squidward, who rages against his, Mrs. Puff has given up. She's resigned to her suffering in a way that's quiet and devastating, and often played for laughs. And it's one of the most uncomfortable character threads in the entire series once you start paying attention. And there's Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy, the retired superheroes who live in the Shady Shoals retirement home. And I think these characters represent one of the darkest ideas the show ever explored, which is the indignity of aging. Mermaid Man was once a powerful hero. He fought crime. He had a nemesis, Man Ray. He was important. And now he's old, forgetful, and living in a home where nobody takes him seriously. He can barely remember his own catchphrases. Barnacle Boy, his sidekick, is furious about being treated like a child, even though he's also elderly. And SpongeBob and Patrick worship them, not as they are now, but as they were. They see the past version, the hero version, and they can't reconcile that with the reality of two old men in a retirement home watching television and eating meatloaf. The show uses them primarily for comedy, and they're very funny. But the underlying premise, that even heroes grow old and become irrelevant, that time erases everyone's accomplishments, that the world moves on whether you're ready or not, is among the bleakest ideas the show ever embedded in its world. And it did it with a guy in a starfish costume and a guy in a seashell bra, which is, that's the SpongeBob trick right there. The darker the idea, the sillier the packaging. Let me come back down to earth for a second and talk about something more concrete: the show's visual language. Because this is something that the iceberg charts rarely cover, and I think it's crucial to understanding why SpongeBob looks the way it does. Hillenberg studied experimental animation at CalArts under Jules Engel. Experimental animation, not commercial animation, not Hanna-Barbera style, not Disney style. Experimental. And you can see that influence everywhere in the early seasons. The backgrounds in SpongeBob aren't just functional, they're painterly. The underwater landscapes are rendered with this watercolor quality that gives the show a warmth and texture that digital animation rarely achieves. The character designs are deceptively simple. SpongeBob is basically a rectangle with eyes. But the way the animators stretch and squash him, the range of expressions they get out of that simple shape, is a masterclass in character animation. SpongeBob's face in any given frame communicates more emotion than most animated characters achieve in an entire episode. And that's because the show's storyboard artists understood that in animation, the face is the primary storytelling tool. The plot is secondary. The emotion is everything. There's also the way the show uses scale and perspective. Bikini Bottom is an underwater city, but it has roads, houses, restaurants, a jail, a hospital. The buildings are made of what looks like stone and metal. Characters drive boats that function like cars. They have fires, which is impossible underwater. The show acknowledges this exactly once, in the episode Pressure, when Sandy points out that sea creatures can't do things that land creatures can, and vice versa. But otherwise, the show ignores the logical contradictions of its own world entirely. And I think that's important, because the refusal to explain itself is part of what makes Bikini Bottom feel alive. Real places don't explain their rules to you. You just exist in them. And SpongeBob creates a world that's so internally consistent in its inconsistency that you stop questioning it. You just accept it. The way you accept that a sponge can be a fry cook, or that a squirrel can be friends with a starfish, or that there's a painting of the ocean on the wall of an underwater restaurant. We talked about the meme legacy earlier, but I want to dig deeper into that because I think the meme culture around SpongeBob reveals something important about the show's design. The reason SpongeBob memes work so well, the reason they've dominated internet culture in a way no other show has, is because SpongeBob's character design is inherently expressive. Every frame of SpongeBob is a potential meme because every frame communicates a clear, readable emotion. The mocking SpongeBob meme uses a still from the 2013 episode Little Yellow Book, in which SpongeBob is in a contorted chicken-like pose. It became viral in May 2017 when a Twitter user used it as a reaction image. The imagination meme is just SpongeBob making a rainbow with his hands. Item ahead out is SpongeBob standing up from a chair. These are simple images, but they communicate universal emotions so effectively that they transcend the show itself. You don't need to know anything about SpongeBob to understand what mocking SpongeBob means. The image does all the work, and that universality of expression is a direct result of Hillenberg's animation philosophy. He designed characters to be legible, to communicate instantly, and in doing so, he accidentally created the perfect template for meme culture, a medium that values instant emotional communication above all else. Let me circle back to something I mentioned much earlier, because I promised callbacks, and I keep my promises. Remember when I talked about the Intertidal Zone, Hillenberg's educational comic from 1989? The one with Bob the Sponge and Rocky the Shrimp? Here's something that I think is profoundly moving when you think about it. Hillenberg created that comic to teach kids about marine biology. That was its purpose, education. And then he took those same characters, that same love for the ocean, that same desire to share something wonderful with young people, and he channeled it into SpongeBob SquarePants. The show isn't educational in the traditional sense. It doesn't teach you about tide pools or marine ecosystems, but it teaches you something else. It teaches you that the ocean is a place of wonder, that the creatures in it are worthy of attention and empathy, that the underwater world is as rich and strange and beautiful as any world above the surface. And I genuinely believe that SpongeBob has done more for marine awareness than any educational program ever made. Not through facts and figures, but through love. Hillenberg loved the ocean. He put that love into every frame, and millions of kids absorbed it without even realizing they were being taught to care about something bigger than themselves. The line from Bob the Sponge in a 1989 educational comic to SpongeBob SquarePants, dominating internet culture in the 2020s, is not a straight line. It's messy and complicated, and involves corporate interests and creative compromises, and a lot of luck. But the thread that runs through all of it, the thing that connects Bob the Sponge to mocking SpongeBob to every late-night rewatch on Paramount Plus, is a marine biologist's love for the ocean. That's the source. That's the deep current underneath everything else. We're almost at the bottom now, and I want to talk about one more thing before we start the ascent back up. The show's treatment of Karen Plankton. Because I think Karen is the most underappreciated character in the entire series, and she raises the most unsettling question the show has ever posed. Karen is a computer. Plankton built her. She's his wife, and the show treats this relationship with remarkable sincerity. Karen has emotions. She gets frustrated with Plankton. She supports his schemes even though she knows they'll fail. She expresses disappointment, affection, exasperation, love. She is, for all narrative purposes, a fully sentient being. And nobody in Bikini Bottom questions this. Not once. There's no episode where someone says, "Wait, you married a computer? That's weird. It's just accepted." Plankton has a computer wife. That's his reality. And here's where it gets deep. If Karen is sentient, if she genuinely feels emotions and has desires and opinions, does it matter that she's a machine? Does the substrate of consciousness, whether it's organic tissue or circuits, change the moral weight of that consciousness? The show never asks this question out loud. It doesn't need to. It just shows you a computer who loves her husband, who gets hurt when he ignores her, who tries to help him even when he doesn't deserve it. And by treating Karen as a full person without ever justifying it, the show sneaks one of the most profound philosophical questions of the 21st century into a cartoon about a sponge. What is personhood? What makes someone real? If Karen feels pain, is it real pain? And if it is, then what does that say about how we treat the machines in our own lives? I told you this iceberg goes deep. And speaking of deep, let me talk about one more thing before we start coming back up. The theory that the entire show is set after the events of a real ecological disaster. We already talked about Bikini Atoll, but there's a layer beneath that. Some fans have pointed out that the biology in Bikini Bottom doesn't make sense. And maybe that's the point. Sea sponges don't have faces. Starfish don't talk. Crabs don't run restaurants. Squirrels don't live underwater. And the standard response is, well, it's a cartoon. But what if the biological impossibilities are part of the show's internal logic? What if the creatures of Bikini Bottom are the way they are because their ecosystem was fundamentally altered by nuclear radiation? Not in a comic book way where radiation gives you superpowers. In a real, biological way where mutation and adaptation create organisms that shouldn't exist. SpongeBob's square shape, his ability to regenerate, his capacity for emotion and speech, all of these could be read as mutations. And the fact that nobody in Bikini Bottom questions any of this, that talking fish and fire underwater and music coming from nowhere are all just accepted as normal, could be because in a post-nuclear ecosystem, normalcy has been redefined. There is no baseline for natural in Bikini Bottom because nature was irrevocably changed before any of the current residents were born. They don't question the impossibilities because they've never known anything else. Now, do I think Steven Hillenberg sat down and said, "I'm going to create a show about nuclear mutants"? No, I don't. Tom Kenny has been pretty clear that he doesn't buy the mutation theory. But I think Hillenberg, with his marine biology background, understood the real history of Bikini Atoll, understood what nuclear testing did to the Pacific Ocean, and chose to set his show there anyway. Whether the darker implications are intentional or emergent, they're woven into the fabric of the world. And once you see them, the cheerful colors of Bikini Bottom start to look a little different, a little more desperate, a little more like the bright paint you put on the wall to cover the cracks. There's also the theory, and this one I find genuinely chilling, that each character in SpongeBob represents a stage of grief, or a mental health condition, or a coping mechanism for existential dread. I'm not going to map every character to a specific diagnosis, because that kind of armchair psychology can be reductive and irresponsible. But I will say this, the show creates a world where every character is dealing with something. SpongeBob's relentless positivity can be read as a conscious choice, but it can also be read as denial. Squidward's anger and depression are obvious. Patrick's obliviousness could be a defense mechanism. Mr. Crab's obsession with money mirrors how people cling to measurable success when everything else feels unstable. Sandy throws herself into science and physical challenges the way people throw themselves into work to avoid thinking about how alone they are. Plankton's schemes give him purpose in a world that otherwise has no use for him. And Gary, the only character who seems genuinely content, is the one who can't speak. Make of that what you will. Alright, let me start bringing this back together, because we've covered a lot of ground tonight. From the surface level stuff everyone knows to the deep, dark bottom of the iceberg where the questions get uncomfortable. And I want to tie it all together with something that I think gets at the heart of why SpongeBob SquarePants matters. And I want to sit with one more thing here, because it connects to everything, and I think it gets lost in the iceberg discussions. The show's treatment of work. SpongeBob SquarePants is, fundamentally, a show about work. SpongeBob works at the Krusty Krab. Squidward works at the Krusty Krab. Mr. Krabs runs the Krusty Krab. Plankton runs the Chum Bucket. Sandy does scientific research. Mrs. Puff teaches. Larry the Lobster is a lifeguard. The world of Bikini Bottom is defined by labor, and the show explores the entire spectrum of possible relationships a person can have with their work. SpongeBob loves his job to the point of obsession. He cries when he can't go to work. He dreams about going to work. He considers his job the core of his identity, and the show both celebrates and gently mocks this. It's wonderful that SpongeBob finds meaning in flipping patties. It's also, if you think about it, a little sad, because his boss pays him almost nothing. His workplace is a dingy fast food restaurant. His coworker openly hates being there, and yet SpongeBob's love for the Krusty Krab is unshakable. Is that inspiring, or is it delusion? Is finding joy in underpaid labor a spiritual triumph or a capitalist fantasy? The show asks this question in 100 different ways across 100 different episodes, and it never gives you a definitive answer. And I think that ambiguity is one of the most honest things about it. Squidward, on the other hand, represents the experience that most adults know too well. Working a job you don't care about because you need to eat. Squidward doesn't hate cashiering because he's lazy. He hates it because it's not what he was meant to do. He was meant to play clarinet. He was meant to paint. He was meant to create. But creation doesn't pay the bills in Bikini Bottom, just like it doesn't pay the bills in the real world. So Squidward stands behind a register and takes orders from a crab and tolerates a sponge. And every morning he wakes up and does it again. And the show understands this. It never treats Squidward's artistic ambitions as delusion. It just treats them as tragically insufficient for survival. You can be talented and still be stuck. You can be creative and still be poor. You can have dreams and still need a day job. That's not a failure of character. That's a feature of the system. And for a kids show to articulate that so clearly, without ever saying it out loud, is one of the most radical things about SpongeBob SquarePants. There's a concept in philosophy called absurdism. It comes from Albert Camus, the French philosopher who argued that human beings constantly seek meaning in a universe that is inherently meaningless. The conflict between our desire for meaning and the universe's silence is what Camus called the absurd. And his prescription wasn't despair, it was rebellion. Not against the meaninglessness, but against the temptation to give up. Camus famously wrote about Sisyphus, the mythological figure condemned to roll a boulder up a hill for eternity, only for it to roll back down every time. And Camus said, we must imagine Sisyphus happy. SpongeBob SquarePants is Sisyphus with a spatula. Every morning, SpongeBob wakes up. He feeds Gary. He goes to the Krusty Krab. He fries patties. He comes home. He goes to bed. The next morning, same thing. There's no escape from the cycle. There's no promotion. There's no retirement. There's no meaningful change. The boulder rolls back down the hill, and SpongeBob is happy. Not because he's too stupid to see the cycle, not because he doesn't know any better, but because he has chosen, deliberately and consistently, to find joy in the repetition. He loves frying patties. He loves his friends. He loves his snail. He loves jellyfishing. He loves the Krusty Krab. He loves Bikini Bottom. He loves his life. And the universe, in all its absurdity, with its nuclear testing sites, and its existential voids and its vampires working at restaurants, cannot take that from him. That's what Steven Hillenberg understood that so few creators do. Joy isn't the absence of suffering, it's the choice to keep going anyway. SpongeBob isn't happy because his life is easy. He's happy because he decided to be. And that decision, that simple, radical, revolutionary decision to find meaning in a meaningless world, is the most profound thing a Nickelodeon cartoon has ever said. And honestly, I think that's why people watch SpongeBob when they can't sleep. Not because it's soothing, not because it's familiar, but because somewhere, deep down, at the bottom of their own personal iceberg, they know that SpongeBob's philosophy works, that choosing joy is possible, that the boulder will roll back down and you'll push it up again, and that's okay. Because the view from the hill is beautiful if you stop to look at it. Remember earlier, when I talked about the painting of the ocean on the wall? That painting is the show's way of telling you that the biggest mystery isn't hidden in the deep water, or the dark theories, or the banned episodes. The biggest mystery is right there on the surface, hanging on the wall, waiting for someone to notice it. The ocean, the life, the absurd, beautiful, terrifying, hilarious fact of existing. SpongeBob sees it. That's his gift. He sees the ocean in the painting, and the painting in the ocean, and he doesn't need to understand the difference. He just needs to laugh. So here's my question, the one I don't have an answer to. The one that I've been thinking about since I started putting this together, and I still don't know. What would Steven Hillenberg think of all this? Not the iceberg, not this video, but all of it. The spin-offs, the movies, the memes, the merchandise, the billion-dollar franchise that grew from a marine biologist's educational comic about tide pools. The fact that his creation outlived him and became something he never could have imagined when he was drawing Bob the Sponge in 1989. Would he be proud? Would he be horrified? Would he be amused? Would he feel like the painting on the wall, a picture of the thing he created, hanging inside the thing he created, noticed by nobody and everyone at the same time? I don't know. I've been thinking about it for weeks, and I still don't know. And I think maybe that's the point. Maybe the best things we create aren't meant to be fully understood, even by the people who create them. Maybe SpongeBob is bigger than any one person, even the person who made it. Maybe that's the deepest layer of the iceberg. Not a dark theory or a hidden fact, but the simple, irreducible truth that some things matter more than we can explain. And if you can't sleep tonight, well, that's what the next video is for. Thank you for spending this time with me. I mean that. Whatever time it is where you are, whatever brought you here, I'm glad you stayed. If you want to keep going, the subscribe button is right there, and I promise we've got a lot more to talk about. But for now, close your eyes. Think about Bikini Bottom. Think about a sponge who lives in a pineapple and loves his job and his friends and his pet snail. Think about how simple that is, how perfect, and let that carry you wherever you're going next. Good night.